Hello, and it is day 4. Actually, it's a lie, it's day 5. Day 4 is a bit of a non-starter, but I did start recording on day 4. You're going to suddenly see me switch clothes like that. So don't be disturbed, there's going to be some continuity issues. Who do you think I am? Martin Scorsese? This is what I was saying yesterday.
Hi, I'm Mark Postgate. You may remember me from such films as Rush, and that's about it. Rush, of course, was a dramatisation of the life of Geddy Lee, the Canadian rock star. So you can't trust a single word I say, because that's not true. It was a dramatisation of the life of James Hunt, the thrill seeker and Formula One racing driver. And it is true that I was in it. And it's the only IMDb credit I have that is a big budget film that went on general release rather than being a independent film or a student film that only would appear in a small festival somewhere or a student graduation showcase. And I certainly didn't mention it for the bragging rights because there are none. I was only a mechanic for McLaren in it. And being the mechanic for McLaren, I spent a lot of time in the pits. That's where we all hung out. And also there was somebody that was a McLaren mechanic in the 1970s and knew the real James Hunt. He was there in the role of advisor to advise what would have been done. And most of the time he was telling us that how things that were being filmed didn't really happen that way. We take this as read that when a true story is dramatized, it's not really an accurate depiction of the story. Certain facts are taken and they are embellished or given meaning, and in between there's some fictional elements to weave it all together into a story. And this has always been the case. Macbeth is based on a true story, but the real Macbeth did not murder Duncan in his sleep. He actually killed Duncan on the battlefield. So in fact, the way Macbeth killed Duncan in real life was no different to the way Henry VI killed Richard III, which was also adapted into a play by the same writer, a little known writer called William Shakespeare, or Francis Bacon, depending on who you listen to, or Elizabeth I. Let's assume it was Shakespeare for the sake of argument. Yes, we don't expect dramatizations of true stories to be accurate depictions of what happened. Where am I going with that? I was going to read you a quote. This quote is by Joseph Stalin, who you may remember from such awareness-raising campaigns as Movember. See, yet again, you can't trust a single word I say, Let's read the quote. "One death is a tragedy. 1,000,000 is a statistic." And Macbeth's a tragedy as well. That is, you could dramatise one death and make it a really engaging human interest story, and you would find it hard to make a statistic into a really engaging human interest story. course, the statistic that Joseph Stalin is particularly associated with is 600,000, and or maybe twice as many, were Soviet citizens were killed because he suspected that they were political enemies. So I'm not a big fan of his, I have to say. Despite his sterling work at raising the awareness of prostate cancer. Again, a joke. Yeah, but it's still a damn good quote. A quote we're thinking about. And as I say, you would dramatize a story of an individual into a story, and you probably wouldn't dramatize a statistic. For example, Saving Private Ryan was a big budget film that I wasn't in, but don't worry about it. Big budget film that did well at the box office, but Saving 1 Million Privates wasn't. It didn't even do the small festivals and may not even exist. I say you wouldn't dramatize the statistic, but that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're dramatizing the statistic that, well, I'm going to be doing 22 push-ups, and this viral campaign of getting everyone to do 22 push-ups is to raise the awareness that the story is 22 service persons die every day as a result of suicide, as a result of post-traumatic stress. That's a dramatization. The actual story is, in 2012, there was a study done based on figures from 2010, looking at suicide, and they found a large number of suicides were veterans, and if this figure was generalized across the entire United States, it would mean that 22 service persons had committed suicide per day in 2010. That's just a snapshot of 2010. More recent studies have shown lower statistics. As I say, when you dramatize, you take the most traumatic facts and weave a narrative around them. There's no reason to think that the 22 that commit suicide every day actually had post-traumatic stress. There is a good reason to think that they had mental health problems, because committing suicide is a sure sign that you have a mental health problem. There is a problem with post-traumatic stress amongst the combat veterans. It's not actually the profession that has the highest rate of post-traumatic stress. The profession with the highest rate of post-traumatic stress is actually prison wardens. Other professions that are associated with post-traumatic stress include healthcare workers, firemen, policemen, transport workers, construction workers, people working in security services. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a response to an out-of-the-ordinary horrific event that creates a great deal of panic, and anything that was in the environment when that horrific event happened could then later be a trigger for that feelings of panic, which is why, to those that saw combat, it can be that you feel like you haven't come home because you just have to see or smell something that reminds you of the traumatic event, and it feels like you're reliving it. Alright, so I'm now reading about post-traumatic stress disorder on a website called anxiety.org. This is post-traumatic stress disorder in civilians. Although commonly linked to war, PTSD is not exclusive to the military. Here's a look at the effects of the disorder beyond the battlefield. It tells me the prevalence of trauma exposure is above 50% for both men and women in the United States. In fact, 61% of men and 51% of women have experienced at least one trauma during their lifetime. However, fortunately, only 8.1% of men and 20.4% of women who experience trauma go on to develop PTSD. Why there's such a gender difference is something that I'm going to speculate on. Forgive me for speculating. It's going to happen in a moment. I'm going to read a bit more first before I start speculating. Although it may be counterintuitive, in the first 3 months following a trauma, an adaptive coping strategy involves accepting any negative feelings and expressions of symptoms as normal and confronting the trauma memories in order to process them. Being kind to yourself, understanding your symptoms as normal reactions to trauma, and not avoiding trauma reminders will help the natural recovery process. Not avoiding trauma reminders. Now, you will be motivated to avoid trauma reminders because trauma reminders are going to make you feel anxious and go through a panic and whatever. But the thing is to slowly reacquaint yourself with those stimuli that are causing you panic. Common reactions following a traumatic event include intense fear and anxiety, re-experience of trauma through intrusive memories and nightmares, avoidance of trauma reminders, irritability and anger, loss of interest in pleasurable activities, difficulty sleeping, feelings of guilt and shame, disrupted relationships, decreased interest in sex, impaired concentration and activation of other traumatic or negative memories. I'm going to speculate that actually the reason women are almost more than twice as likely to develop PTSD than men there's not necessarily an innate difference between the sexes, but that if you're trying to avoid reminders, then that avoidance behaviour can be supported if you're female, whereas it probably isn't supported if you're male. You think of the trigger warnings that they have in colleges these days. It's, don't read that, that might give you, that might remind you of your trauma. That might remind somebody of their trauma. Well, that's something they're going to have to deal with at some point. Having to deal with facing reminders of your trauma. The reminders of a trauma could be anything like a colour or a smell. So effectively everything should come with a trigger warning in that case. If you had post-traumatic stress disorder, combat post-traumatic stress disorder, then Guy Fawkes Night would have a trigger warning. Because there'd be bangs going off here, there and everywhere. And it doesn't. And nor should it. That's part of the recovery process is facing things that might set you off until they don't set you off anymore. Here's an anecdotal example. I was once dating a girl that when she got depressed she would suffer from agoraphobia, and I went round to her flat one day, and she was suffering from such high anxiety she didn't want to go to the shops because she didn't want to be in public, and she thought that everyone would look at her like she was strange. Not that there wasn't anything particularly strange about her, but she'd gone into some state thinking that everyone was judging her. And she said, "Will you go for me?" And I said, no, but I'll go with you if you like. And shortly after we split up, that's not why we split up, by the way. We didn't split up because I wouldn't go to the shops for her. That would be a pretty poor reason for for splitting up with somebody. That was there were other events that transpired later on. A couple of months after we split up, I bumped into a mutual friend who she was starting to form a relationship with. Slowly but surely, they were slowly developing a relationship together. And he was out shopping for her for that very reason, that she was having another one of her panic attacks. And he'd never been trained as a mental health nurse as I had, and he'd never studied psychology like I had. So when she said, "I can't face going to the shops, will you go for me?" he was right there, saying, "Of course it'd be," not actually saying, "Of course it'd be an honour to serve you, my lady," but it was he kind of got the impression it was like that. And she deteriorated. She deteriorated because he wasn't motivated to challenge her feelings of anxiety. He colluded with them. When I tried to explain to him that you're not going to be doing her any good whatsoever by just being subordinate to her fears. He thought I was being patronising, obviously. But you can see how that's a gendered thing. You know, if a guy was going, I can't face going to the shops, but you go for me, he'd say, "Oh, for God's sake, pull yourself together." You'll notice that I didn't say pull yourself together, whilst I didn't give what might be the typical response to a female. I didn't give the typical response to a male either. I think I went for what was neutral ground, where I neither treated her like she was fragile, nor did I treat her like she was invulnerable. The common argument you'll see made in comment threads when MRAs argue with feminists and vice versa. You don't see it very often these days, because anywhere it's likely to happen, the comments threads are closed permanently. But during the culture wars of 2014, it would happen quite frequently. And you would see an MRA make an argument with feminists, which was, name me one legal right that men have that women don't here in the West. And of course they couldn't, because in fact every legal right that men have, women now have too. And there are still some rights that women have that men don't. And the point of the argument is to make, hey, you've got nothing left to talk about. It's our turn to talk now. But I don't think it's entirely true. It is true about legal rights, but that means then we're having to confine ourselves to purely legal rights, and we can't talk about social. I think if you talk about socially, I think there are differences that disadvantage women, and I think that's one of them there. Whilst many of the things that disadvantage men socially are to do with a sort of male disposability, there is a flip side to that, and the flip side is female preciousness. And there's an example right there of the disadvantage of female preciousness. If you are feeling helpless, there will be some idiot who will support your feeling of helplessness by giving you way too much help. There will always be somebody who is willing to protect the fuck out of you, whether you want protection or not. And I think that's disadvantageous. And that's the root of some of the female disadvantages associated with Islamic culture. Is women aren't allowed to go out without being escorted by a male relative. That's an example of female preciousness being a disadvantage because it's a restriction of freedoms. But the restriction of freedoms is motivated by an excessive desire to protect. The worst thing that can happen then is you try to start to avoid those things that cause you anxiety, and as a result of avoiding them, then there's nothing to diminish the association of anxiety with the things that cause the anxiety, and it can quickly become a phobia. The reason that this particular campaign, I think, is picking on post-traumatic stress is for that reason, that it is very sensational. It's likely that a lot of these suicides are associated with the slightly less sensational adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorder can be caused by other stressful events that are perhaps not so out of the ordinary, not so beyond everyone's experience. Events like a bereavement, a loss of a job, divorce, financial issues, and similarly these are associated with anxiety, and similarly they can lead to depression and maybe even suicide. So what this dramatization of the statistic is doing is, as you do when you dramatize, you simplify the story, and as you simplify the story down to the level of a grim fairy tale or Red Riding Hood, where you can probably remember that story quite easily and relate it in an oral tradition type way. But an accurate depiction of the story would be have something rather of the level of complexity of Game of Thrones, with lots of different players, the players here being different factors in the suicide rate amongst veterans. Even for those veterans that saw combat, it isn't actually the post-traumatic stress disorder alone that leads to suicide necessarily, but also guilt. There's a high level of problems with guilt associated with seeing combat, and partly survivor guilt, because of course your friends died, your comrades died, and you didn't. But also there's the guilt associated with finding your killer yourself. Okay, this is a rather tragic story. I'm reading from an article called The Fundamental Difference between the Veteran and the Civilian's PTSD. And it concerns a veteran who returned from Iraq. He just couldn't stop reliving the day he also had to shoot at a car with family in it. The resulting deaths were the only thing he could remember about that horrible day. What he forgot was what he had tried to do to prevent it. He threw rocks at the car, he shot warning shots into the air, he screamed at them. The car just kept coming. Knowing how many troops had been killed by suicide car bombers, he was worried about the men he was with, and it was his job to protect them. He opened fire. When he discovered it was a family, he didn't think he could survive that kind of pain inside of him. If you watch the video that I linked to on day one, a video called Shooting to Kill, discuss the training of modern military. If you haven't seen it, then watch it, but I will recap it so you don't have to watch it straight away. During the First and the Second World War, there was a problem that 98% of servicemen didn't shoot anyone. They couldn't. They hesitated, and in the moment of hesitation they acknowledged the humanity of the people they were shooting, and then they'd aim to miss. They'd shoot above the head, just like the stormtroopers in Star Wars. Maybe the stormtroopers in Star Wars, they're not really just crap shots, maybe they just have a conscience and they can't bring themselves to shoot some farm boy. So they shoot over the heads of the soldiers. Now, to deal with that, the military started to use Skinnerian techniques. B.F. Skinner was a behavioural psychologist, did experiments with animals involving getting to press levers and giving them small electric shocks in order to model their behaviour. I know that there's probably some animal liberation people listening right now getting all angry. This should make you angrier. This should make you angrier. So they train the military to shoot on reflex, so the brain doesn't get engaged before the trigger's been pulled. That should make you angrier. But just because the conscience is overridden in the moment doesn't mean the conscience is obliterated. Sooner or later, people have to deal with the fact that they've killed somebody and they've got that in their head. They can remember the images of killing. That would of course have personality changes. Training itself gives you personality changes. Now, some other factors associated with problems that veterans face that could be both caused by mental illness and also be a cause of mental illness. Upon being discharged, you're talking about a high chance of joblessness, you're talking about a high chance of divorce. The services are quite pro-marriage. Marriage is quite heavily incentivized within the military, and in fact military personnel are more likely to marry than civilians, and there's a strong incentive to stay married as well whilst you're in the service. At the same time, of course, there's a lot of strain put on marriage, partly those personality differences that I mentioned and the mental health issues, and the fact that you may be separated for long periods of time, which increases the chances of infidelity. Because there's a lot of pressure on marriage during military life, and there is a lot of incentivization to be married, you've got two forces operating in different directions there, and as soon as they get discharged, then divorce is very likely. And for men, divorce is particularly hard. Men that are divorced are 2.4 times as likely to commit suicide as men who are single or married. And by comparison, a divorced man is 9 times more likely to commit suicide than a divorced woman. You can see why divorce would affect men harder than it would affect women. There's not only just the emotional wrench of having a life-changing event like that, but there's also the fact that he still has obligations to her, financial obligations to her, and he will have no benefits associated with being part of a family anymore. He may even lose contact with his children. Children he may not have bonded with or had the chance to bond with to the same extent as a father that hasn't been sent on tours of duty. It could feel like you've made a lot of sacrifices for nothing. And as I say, he continues to have a financial obligation because of the maintenance laws and alimony laws and divorce courts, whereas she has no obligation to him whatsoever, not even an obligation to let him see his children. Homelessness is associated with both mental illness and with divorce. Joblessness, of course, is both a cause and effect of mental health issues, and also a potential cause of divorce. Domestic violence is associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, not just in terms of being a perpetrator, but also in terms of being a victim. Sometimes the frustrations of dealing with somebody with mental health issues can be so strong that those frustrations are expressed by violence. As you can see, there's a lot of factors that are all feeding into each other, and it's very, very complex. Now I'm going to link back in a moment to what I was saying when I first started filming this, and I kind of had to stop then because I started to make some questions about the validity of the charity 22 Kill, which has started this challenge. And then I began to wonder whether I was being fair. I don't want to badmouth a charity that is actually doing some good in the world. But it's a what's called a non-profit. It's not a charity. It's not a charity. It's a non-profit. A non-profit does not necessarily mean it's not making profit. Funnily enough, it just means it's not giving profits to shareholders. It doesn't mean all the proceeds go to charities, and it does donate to veteran charities. But then why not just donate directly? Why donate through this company? Now I have to say that no one I know that's doing the 22 Push-Up Challenge is actually putting the hashtag in for 22 Kill. Anyway, I mentioned t-shirts later, but actually the more significant thing is not t-shirts, but these things called honour rings. Anyway, as I say, I began to feel uncomfortable with what I was saying, and I started doing some research, and I thought, well, if I'm suspicious, there must be other people that are suspicious too, and I didn't find very many. I found most sites were kind of supportive of charity. The Daily Mirror is very supportive of this charity. We know Donald Trump's very supportive of this charity. I just had a bad feeling, a suspicion. Anyway, I'm going to link back to what I was saying yesterday, and then just bear in mind that I felt uncomfortable about it after I'd said it. And then I'm going to recap and say why I think that my suspicions are possibly founded.
Obviously, advocacy work tends to be pro-drama, because the more dramatic something is, the more panicky people are, the more likely they are to reach into their pockets and deliver upset money. And this is sort of a reason why yesterday, when I was reading an article and I read 22 Kill, which is the charity responsible for this event, and the reason I pulled a sort of slight disgust face. And then when I read on the article and I read the list of charities dealing with veterans that the article was actually recommending, and I noted 22 Kill not mentioned, because 22 Kill are not doing very much for veterans at all. All they're doing is dramatising a statistic and selling t-shirts off the back of it. Very reminiscent of another campaign. I don't know if you remember Fuck Hate. Fuck Hate were doing a campaign which involved getting toddlers dressed as princesses to just be obnoxious whilst reciting misleading statistics for no reason than to sell t-shirts. And I don't think Kill 22 are any different. And it seems ghoulish to me to have some very real issues like suicide and like
post-traumatic stress, and be dramatizing it. So you can sell a T-shirt that says, "Oh, this is a statistic." And the thing about a snapshot is, it was only true at one point in time. It's not. It's not true for all time. And the thing when you dramatize a story about an individual, in fact, all stories, human interest stories, are actually about something that is a truth, and I'm putting truth in speech marks there, as opposed to a fact, a truth about the human condition. We don't expect it to be factual, and because we don't expect it to be factual, to me it almost seems more honest, that it's not being factual, but it's still bringing you a truth. So the difference between a novelist and a journalist is, a novelist brings you truths disguised as fiction, whereas a journalist brings you fictions disguised as truth. I think that if any veterans charity that has 22 in the title, that's a red flag that it's not a genuine charity, but it's an exploitative one. The genuine ones I've mentioned, they're actually doing things to help get veterans back into work, and helping veterans integrate with other veterans, so that they have a support network. They're not promoting this 22 thing at all. So just bear in mind, when I do the 22 push-ups, I really am doing it for the sake of my health. Right, well, you can understand why at that point I started to have a crisis of conscience, because I thought, well, hold on, I've got to be careful here. I don't want to make allegations about a company that might damage it, that it could actually be doing a lot of good. And they have certainly raised awareness, because if it wasn't for this campaign, I wouldn't be here talking now and have done this research. And I don't know for sure that the company is run purely out of a profit motive. There is a possibility that it is. It's called a not-for-profit company rather than a charity. The thing about these not-for-profit companies is they can make a profit. They all they have to show is that at the end of the year they've broken even, but they can award their CEOs as high a salary as you like, and obviously the salary of the CEOs comes under expenses. There have been some. There's a America's Worst Charities here on. Well, it's an article, and one of the worst ones is Kids Wish Network. Every year, Kids Wish Network raises millions of dollars in donations in the name of dying children and their families. Every year, it squanders almost every penny. The money gets diverted to enrich the charity's operators and the for-profit companies Kids Wish hires to drum up donations. Sick children wind up with less than 3 cents of every dollar raised. That's been the formula for 16 years, ever since Kids Wish mimics the respected Make-A-Wish Foundation, not to be confused, and launched its relentless drive for money. In the past decade alone, Kids Wish has channeled nearly $110 million donated for sick children to its corporate fundraisers. That makes it the worst charity in the nation. There is a list here of the on the Tampa Bay Times of the 50 worst charities in America, as updated in 2014. So of course 22 Kill doesn't make it on the list, because 22 Kill was set up more recently than that. As I say, it's not the t-shirts, it's the honour rings that they make most of their money selling. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I did a search, and as I say, some companies, some media outlets are completely supportive of the campaign. The Daily Mirror is very supportive of the campaign. Some have expressed concern about the statistic not being 100% accurate. That article I read from the Observer on day one, I looked at the comments threads on that, and they were so angry. There was so many angry comments at the guy who had wrote that article. Unlike me, who went, "Oh well, that's fair criticism. Let's take that on board as constructive criticism." They're really angry, and they're going, "Why must you be so negative?" And this is a cult that exists at the moment, a sort of positive thinking evangelism where any criticism at all is negative. It's so bad to be negative. Well, then you're being negative about negativity, aren't you? Why can't you be positive about negativity? If you were positive about negativity, you would treat it as criticism. You go, "Oh, that's a learning experience. I can learn from that." So one of the things that I thought was a parallel between Fuck Hate and Kill 22 is their attitudes to their names. Kill 22, no, sorry, 22 Kill rather, is saying, if you have a problem with the word kill, then you're part of the problem. That makes you feel uncomfortable, you're part of the problem. Well, I think the word kill does make people feel uncomfortable, and I don't think you should guilt somebody. Use that discomfort, which you know is going to be there, into guilting people. And Fuck Hate were doing the similar thing. They're going, if you have a problem with little girls saying fuck, then you're part of the problem. Well, I'd have a problem with children saying fuck because children have not developed the adult social skill of knowing when it is or isn't appropriate to say fuck, and which groups of people it is appropriate to say it with and which ones it isn't. If you teach kids to say fuck, they're going to say fuck to their teachers, they're going to say fuck to the vicar, they're going to say fuck to your grandmother. Whereas we as adults know that there is a time and place to say fuck, and it's obviously in a video on Facebook. Yeah, it's natural to feel uncomfortable with that. It certainly doesn't make you part of the problem. Some of the posturing and pretension, it made me feel like I was being conned. Well, not made me feel like I was being conned because I'm not giving any money, but it makes me think that they're out to con people. Anyway, obviously Donald Trump is giving them a donation. They must be legit because he's a sensible man. He would never fall for anything like that. The joke, by the way. A bit of politics. So, yes, the thing that finally clinched it for me and made me think that I'm probably on the right track here to be suspicious of this company. They can claim, oh, we raise awareness and we give some money to charity. We don't have to give a lot of money to charity. We give money to charities that help veterans, but you know, if it was only like 3 cents to the dollar, then that's nothing. If I was making that much money, I'd give money to charity. Give me money, I'll give some of it to charity. Promise. if all I have to do is give free pennies to charity every £1 you give me, then yeah, give me as much money as you like. I'll do it, I promise. Anyway, I'm not saying that is the balance for 22 Kill. I'm just saying it feasibly could be. We know of a charity, not a charity, a non-profit company that does that. This is the thing that clinched it for me, was one of the things on their website is donate a ring to a veteran, $22. Many veterans simply cannot afford an honour ring. We hear about this all day long. Help by donating a ring for a veteran. 22 Kill will connect you with the recipient so you have a chance to know them and learn their story. Buy them a ring. Just remember all the things we've been talking about, right? We've been talking about possibly something that's seen action. And during seeing action, they may have killed people, or they may have seen their brothers in arms killed. So they're feeling guilt, angry. They've had a life-changing event. Um, they've they've come back and their marriage is on the rocks. Although the services are encouraging them to stay married because the services like families, very pro families. The services, but their marriage is on the rocks, and he's withdrawn because he's struggling to cope with what's happened to him and what he's experienced. She's getting increasingly dissatisfied with his withdrawal. Maybe she gets so frustrated she lashes out at him. Even if he doesn't retaliate, just the impulse to retaliate increases his feelings of guilt, because we're heavily ingrained as men, as boys, that women are you don't hurt women. And that same there's not that same training to restrain yourself from that impulse if you're a woman. Many a time I've been slapped in the face when I've when I've said something offensive. I can't remember who it was. The writer was always writing about Spaniards. You know the one. You know the writer was writing about Spaniards. Used to say, if you've been slapped in the face by a woman, you've never lived. Anyway, so he's feeling intense feelings of guilt. And he's, what am I? What's going on with me? When he leaves the services, he can't find a job. She divorces him. The marriage was shit anyway. The marriage has been shit for years. She divorces him. He's now, not only is he jobless, divorced, he's homeless. He's got mental health problems. Some of the mental health problems are from what happened to him maybe while he was in service. Some of the mental health problems will be thinking about things that are happening right now, in his life, right now. He turns to alcohol and drugs because that's just self-medicating. The association between drug addiction and alcohol addiction and mental illness, there's some arguments which is the cause and which is the effect. I kind of think that drug and alcohol abuse is symptomatic of mental illness rather than the cause of mental illness. He's having to panhandle to pay for it, and then out of the blue somebody comes up to him and says, "Somebody's bought you a ring." Oh, great, it's great. It's going to transport me into the Green Lantern and that might solve some of my problems. Otherwise, it's not really what I wanted. So I just found that absurd. Buy him a ring. There's also something about these rings. You'd think the knowledge that in the same way as the leading cause of divorce is marriage, the leading cause of being a veteran is during the military. So you'd think that the knowledge that the military causes an elevated risk of all these problems, that all of which could contribute to suicide, and overall an elevated risk of suicide, might put you off of the military. Might put you off, mightn't it? So these rings are cool obsidian and black. They're obviously aimed at the youth. They've got these silver logos on. These silver logos are military logos. Looks like they're making the military cool. It seems to me they're not destigmatizing mental illness. They're not destigmatizing use of mental health services. They're not destigmatizing post-traumatic stress disorder. They're destigmatizing the military. There was a campaign recently for joining the military in Britain, join the British Army. And I've never heard a campaign like it. I mean, I've seen lots of campaigns for the British Army over my time, and this was one that was running on radio. And basically, the kid in it wanted to join the military. There's two versions of it. One of them it's a girl and one of them it's a boy. And the parent says, don't. And they go, don't what? Don't be all I can be. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Stop oppressing me, Mum. It was kind of the gist of it. Don't oppress me. Don't. Oh, you're so establishment, not letting me join the military. Yeah, stand up to the man and join the military. What? I thought this is very interesting because it's selling the military as being a rebellious thing to do. The rebellious thing to do is join the army. And I thought, that's a very strange ad campaign for joining the military. It's almost like it's almost like it's suggesting that joining the military now is a step onto the ladder of the oppression Olympics. If you've got if you haven't got the privilege of being able to call yourself a victim, you can earn it. You can earn it by joining the military, and it's really cool. And anyone has a problem with it, that's their problem with you. That's oh God. That's the thing that actually worries me most of all about it. Is it's making money and it's glorifying the very cause of the problem. The problem is the military. I'll do 22 push-ups in a minute to prove that even a civilian can do it. A civilian that skip PE. Oh God, whatever I do I can't help making it subversive. I don't try to be subversive, I promise I don't try to be subversive, I just can't help it. It's just every road, every path I take leads to subversion.